I'm Sarah Matthews, 28 years old, and until last month, I believed I had the loving family everyone envied. Then I overheard my parents, Caroline and Robert, casually discussing how they regretted having me over dinner. The biggest mistake we Montios made, Mom sighed while Dad nodded. Their words shattered 28 years of memories in an instant. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I simply packed my bags and left without a word. What I didn't realize was that I accidentally left behind the one thing that would finally make them understand: my childhood diary. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever had a moment where everything you believed about your family was shattered in an instant? Let me tell you what happened. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in suburban Boston, we were the picture-perfect family according to everyone who knew us. My mother, Caroline, now 54, built her reputation as one of Boston's premier thoracic surgeons, while my father, Robert, 56, managed investment portfolios for clients whose names frequently appeared in Forbes. From the outside, we had everything: financial security, respect in the community, and annual family photos that captured smiling faces and coordinated outfits. But living inside that perfectly framed picture told a different story. As their only child, I learned early that achievement was the currency that purchased my parents' attention. The day I brought home my first perfect spelling test in second grade was the first time I saw genuine approval in my mother's eyes. "This is what we expect from a Matthews?" she said, briefly touching my shoulder before returning to her medical journals. That momentary connection became my blueprint. Excellence was the path to parental love. I became a perfect student, practicing piano until my fingers cramped, joining every academic club and staying up late completing assignments well before deadlines. By 16, I was valedictorian, captain of the debate team, and accepted to Northwestern on a full academic scholarship. Yet each achievement felt hollow, like placing another coin in a parking meter just to buy a few more minutes of their time. The pattern was always the same: brief acknowledgement followed by subtle criticism. 98%? What happened to the other two? My father would ask, barely looking up from his financial reports. Writing became my sanctuary at age 7, when my grandmother gave me my first journal, a small leather-bound book with a tiny brass lock. "For your thoughts too precious to share," she'd whispered. That night, I wrote my first entry. "Today, Mommy and Daddy couldn't come to my recital. Mrs. Porter drove me. I played perfectly, but it felt wrong without them." Those diaries became my confidants, witnesses to a childhood filled with piano recitals where I performed to empty chairs reserved with hopeful programs, science fairs where I explained my projects to my friends' parents while mine were handling, emergencies, and birthdays celebrated a week late because of conferences that couldn't be missed. I learned to rationalize their absence as I grew. They were helping sick people, securing financial futures, contributing to society in ways more important than attending elementary school performances. I told myself I was being selfish for wanting more of their time, that independence was a virtue they were teaching me. The diaries chronicled my evolution from confusion to understanding to acceptance. By high school, I developed a sophisticated filing system for my journals, color-coded. By year, each page dated and categorized by theme. These meticulous records became more than emotional outlets. They were documentation of a pattern I wasn't yet ready to name. There were bright moments, of course. The Christmas my father taught me to calculate compounding interest and seemed genuinely impressed by how quickly I grasped the concept. The rare Sundays when my mother would let me observe her suturing techniques on oranges, praising my steady hands. I treasured these moments, stretching them in my memory like precious metal hammered thin to cover more surface. Yet these glimpses of connection were consistently followed by longer absences, like my parents needed to retreat and reestablish emotional distance after allowing themselves momentary vulnerability. I became adept at reading micro-expressions, the slight tightening around my mother's eyes when my existence required adjustments to her schedule, my father's almost imperceptible sigh when family obligations interfered with work responsibilities. The subtle patterns were all recorded in my growing collection of diaries, though at the time, I interpreted these signals through the lens of a child desperate for approval. They weren't pulling away, they were motivating me to be better, more self-sufficient, more deserving of their limited attention. After graduating summa cum laude from Northwestern, I moved to Chicago permanently and built my life deliberately away from Boston, yet close enough for monthly visits home. These regular pilgrimages became exercises in optimism, each time convincing myself that this visit would be different, that the physical distance had created space for emotional connection to grow. Chicago became my sanctuary, a place where my achievements were recognized on their own merits rather than measured against impossible standards. I joined a boutique digital marketing agency and quickly distinguished myself by developing innovative social media strategies that attracted several major national clients. By 26, I was leading my own team and receiving industry recognition, including Digital Marketer of the Year from the Midwest Marketing Association. Despite these professional triumphs, I carried invisible weights that manifested physically before each video call with my parents. Stomach knots, tension headaches, rehearsed conversations designed to highlight accomplishments significant enough to warrant their approval, but not so substantial they might seem like bragging. I met Michael 2 years ago at a marketing conference where we were both speakers. Unlike the men I'd dated previously, Michael noticed things. How I tensed when my phone displayed my parents' number, how my voice changed during family calls, shifting to a higher register, more formal and carefully modulated. "You become a different person when you talk to them," he observed after witnessing a particularly strained birthday call where my parents spent 3 minutes acknowledging my day before transitioning to a detailed account of my father's recent golf tournament victory. Michael's gentle observations were windows into patterns I'd normalized, like how I apologized for successes that might overshadow my parents' accomplishments or minimized personal achievements unless they aligned with their values. "Your parents should be building you up, not making you smaller," Michael noted after I downplayed my recent promotion during a weekend visit to Boston. His perspective was both illuminating and uncomfortable, challenging the narrative I'd constructed about my family dynamic. I defended my parents reflexively. They just have high standards, and they show love through pushing me toward excellence. Michael never pressed the point, but his knowing glances when I made excuses for their behavior became mirrors I wasn't ready to look into directly. Last spring, I received both a significant promotion to Executive Creative Director and an Industry Innovation Award within the same month. When I shared the news, my mother responded with a cursory, "That's nice, dear," before launching into a 20-minute monologue about her department's funding challenges. My father's response came via text. "Congratulations. Hope this comes with appropriate compensation." No celebration dinner, no proud phone calls to relatives, no acknowledgement beyond the bare minimum social requirement. That night, I developed a migraine so severe, Michael insisted on taking me to the emergency room. The doctor asked about recent stress, and I laughed until I cried, unable to articulate that my physical symptoms stemmed from achievements rather than failures. 2 weeks ago, I decided to spend my vacation time at my parents' home in Boston to help prepare for their 30th wedding anniversary. I conceived this extended visit as an opportunity to strengthen our bonds, to find the connection that had remained elusive throughout my life. Perhaps, I reasoned, 2 uninterrupted weeks together would break through the emotional barriers that had defined our relationship. I arrived with an expensive anniversary gift, a weekend at the luxury resort where they'd honeymooned, professional photos I had taken for their wall, and boundless optimism that this time would be different. For the first 2 days, things seemed promising. My mother complimented my outfit, though she suggested a different pair of shoes would be more flattering on your figure, and my father engaged me in conversation about market trends, primarily to confirm his own theories, rather than hear my expertise. I interpreted these interactions as progress, evidence that our relationship was evolving into the adult connection I'd always hoped for. On the 3rd night, I prepared a special dinner celebrating their professional achievements, complete with custom menu cards listing their career milestones and accomplishments. I spent hours cooking my mother's favorite coq au vin and my father's preferred chocolate soufflé, setting the table with the fine china they reserved for important guests. Everything was designed to demonstrate my love and admiration. What I didn't anticipate was how this attempt at connection would lead to the most painful revelation of my life. I was bringing dessert from the kitchen when I heard my name mentioned, causing me to pause in the hallway. "Sarah has done well enough, I suppose," my mother was saying, her tone clinical as if evaluating a mediocre research paper. "But when I think about all we sacrificed for her, All the opportunities we gave up, I can't help feeling it wasn't worth it. The soufflés trembled in my hands as I froze, unable to move forward or retreat. Remember that research position in Switzerland you turned down when she was in middle school? My father replied, swirling his wine contemplatively. That could have been revolutionary for your career. My mother sighed heavily. And your partnership track was delayed by at least 5 years because you refused to relocate while she was in high school. Sometimes I wonder what we could have accomplished without those constraints. I pressed myself against the wall, suddenly invisible in my own home, as my father continued. The Maldives trip we canceled for her college graduation still bothers me. Thomas said it was the best diving experience of his life. Do you ever wonder? My mother asked in a tone I recognized from countless dinner parties, casual yet pointed. What our lives would have been if we'd waited to have children, or decided not to have them at all? The silence that followed felt eternal before my father responded. Every time I see Richard and Catherine, 2 properties in Europe, complete freedom, and Catherine still actively publishing research papers at 62. My mother's laugh was light, unburdened. Instead, we have a nice enough daughter with a marketing job in Chicago, living in that tiny apartment with a boyfriend who wears jeans to dinner. The disappointing return on a 28-year investment, my father added, and they both chuckled as if sharing an inside joke about a bad stock pick rather than discussing their only child. In that moment, standing in the hallway of my childhood home, I physically experienced the sensation of my world collapsing. The soufflés I'd spent hours perfecting suddenly seemed pathetic, another desperate attempt to prove my worth to people who had been calculating my value against their sacrifices for nearly 3 decades. My body responded before my mind could process. Nausea rose in my throat. My skin flushed cold then hot, and my vision narrowed to a pinpoint. I don't remember setting down the desserts, but I must have, because somehow I made it upstairs without alerting them to my presence. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by achievements carefully preserved by my mother. Trophies dusted weekly, certificates in custom frames, shelves of books with my name in the acknowledgments. I experienced the vertigo of realizing these mementos weren't symbols of parental pride, but rather evidence used to justify a reluctant investment. Every piano recital they'd attended wasn't a choice made from love, but the obligatory appearance to protect their reputation as involved parents. Every achievement they'd acknowledged wasn't celebrated, but measured against what they had sacrificed to make it possible. The conversation replayed in my mind as I sat motionless on my precisely made bed, certain phrases cutting deeper with each mental repetition. Wasn't worth it, disappointing return, constraints, sacrifices. The casual tone was perhaps the most wounding element. This wasn't a heated argument or momentary frustration, but a calm assessment they'd clearly discussed before. This was their true perspective, unfiltered because they never imagined I would hear it. I didn't cry. The shock was too profound for tears, producing instead a strange detachment as if I were observing someone else's tragedy. I sat immobile until I heard them calling for me, their voices carrying an irritation at the interrupted dinner routine rather than concern about my unexplained absence. "Sarah, where's dessert?" My mother's voice held the familiar note of disappointment I'd spent my life trying to remedy. "Did the soufflés fall? I told you to watch the oven temperature." With mechanical movements, I responded that I wasn't feeling well, apologized for the unfinished dinner, and retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. Neither of them came to check on me. Instead, I heard them cleaning up, discussing a conference call my father needed to make to Tokyo later that evening. Their evening continued, uninterrupted by the knowledge that they had just shattered their daughter's understanding of her entire life. Sleep evaded me that night as decades of memories reorganized themselves around this new devastating truth. At 3 a.m, I found myself pulling shoeboxes from the back of my closet, where my earliest diaries remained stored in my childhood bedroom. My parents had never moved them, likely never realized their significance beyond typical adolescent journaling. The entries from age 7 through college told a story I had been unable to recognize while living it. A child, desperately seeking love from parents who viewed her as an obligation, a career impediment, a responsibility rather than a joy. Dad missed my science fair again today. Mrs. Wilson asked where my parents were, and I said they were saving lives and managing important money. She looked sad and patted my head. age 8. Mom said my piano playing is coming along, but needs more precision. I practiced 4 hours today until my fingers couldn't bend anymore. Tomorrow I'll do 5. Age 10. Got perfect scores on all my finals. Dad glanced at them and asked if everyone else had easy tests too. I'll take harder classes next semester. Age 15. The patterns leapt from the pages, undeniable in their consistency. I had internalized their conditional approval so completely that my diaries recorded not pain, but determination to be better, worthy, enough. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't stay another hour in that house. When my parents came downstairs at 6:30, dressed immaculately for their workdays as always, they behaved as if nothing had happened. My mother commented on my terrible color and suggested I drink more water, while my father asked if I'd seen his favorite tie. Neither mentioned the unfinished anniversary dinner or my abrupt disappearance. They moved around me as they always had, acknowledging my presence without truly seeing me. "We'll be late tonight," my mother informed me while checking her calendar. "Hospital board meeting. Don't wait up." My father nodded absently, focused, on his phone. "I've got client dinners the rest of the week. There's that pasta you like in the freezer." And then they were gone, the front door closing behind them with the same definitive click I'd heard throughout my childhood, leaving behind the familiar silence of an empty house. I moved through that silence with newfound clarity, packing only what I truly needed: clothes, my laptop, and most importantly, every diary I'd kept since childhood, retrieving them from their various hiding places throughout the house. There were 42 journals in total, chronicling a life spent chasing approval that was never truly available. I walked through each room one last time, seeing them with new eyes. The formal living room where I'd practiced piano for hours, trying to earn a compliment that never came. The dining room where achievements were acknowledged, then immediately overshadowed. The study where my father had explained that Matthew's women don't cry when I'd broken my arm at 12. I took nothing sentimental, no photos or mementos, just my records of truth bound in various journals. In the kitchen, I wrote a simple note. I heard everything. I'm leaving, need time, don't contact me. I considered writing more. 28 years of unspoken feelings demanded expression. But what purpose would it serve? They had made their position clear. Additional words wouldn't change their fundamental perspective. The drive back to Chicago should have taken 19 hours, but I stopped frequently, unable to maintain focus as waves of grief ambushed me at unexpected moments. At an Ohio rest stop, I finally broke down, sobbing so violently that a concerned stranger asked if I needed medical assistance. "Family emergency," I managed to explain between gasps, the inadequacy of those words nearly triggering another breakdown. By the time I reached my apartment 2 days later, Michael had left 17 increasingly worried messages. He took one look at my face and canceled his meetings for the week, creating a protective space where I could begin processing what had happened. "Turn off your phone," he suggested after it buzzed for the 5th time with my mother's number. "Give yourself permission to put yourself first." It seemed like a revolutionary concept, after 28 years of arranging my existence around my parents' expectations. The first 3 days passed in a fog of sleep, tears, and Michael's patient presence. He asked no questions, simply provided food, comfort, and the profound gift of caring without conditions. When I finally told him what I'd overheard, his face darkened with anger, but he expressed no surprise. "I've seen how they treat you," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how deep it went." I called my office and requested emergency personal leave, something I'd never done despite years of overwork and accumulated vacation time. My boss, instead of expressing the disappointment I irrationally feared, responded with immediate concern and approval for a 2-week absence. "Take whatever time you need, Sarah. Your projects will wait." This simple act of human kindness from someone with no biological obligation to care about my well-being broke something open inside me. I turned off my phone, disconnected from email, and for the first time in my life, prioritized my own healing over external expectations. My parents' messages began professionally concerned and quickly devolved into something more revealing. Day 1. "Sarah, your note is concerning. Please call to discuss what you think you heard." Day 2. "This behavior is unprofessional and immature. Your clients deserve better." Day 3. We've called your office. They say you've taken leave. This is extremely disappointing. Each message exposed priorities that had nothing to do with my well-being, their confusion, their judgment, their disappointment. Not once did they ask, "Are you okay?" or say, "We love you." On day 4, Michael convinced me to see his therapist, Dr. Elaine Chen, who fit me in for an emergency session. "What you're describing," she said after I recounted my childhood and the overheard conversation, "contains classic patterns of emotional neglect. It's particularly insidious because nothing overtly abusive happened. They provided materially while withholding emotionally, making it nearly impossible for you to identify what was missing. This validation from a professional cracked the foundation of self-doubt I'd built my life upon. I wasn't oversensitive or demanding too much. I was recognizing a lifetime of legitimate emotional deprivation. Dr. Chen suggested we explore my diaries together, providing therapeutic context for patterns I'd recorded but never truly understood. The earliest journals revealed a child's progressive internalization of conditional love. Entry after entry documented achievements pursued not from passion, but from desperate hope for connection. Got on 100% on spelling and vocabulary tests. Made mom and dad cards saying how much I love them. Dad said cards waste paper. Mom put hers in the drawer without reading it. Age 9. Won first chair violin today. Called home to tell them. Housekeeper answered and said they're in Aspen this weekend. They forgot to tell me they were going away. Age 12. Full scholarship to Northwestern. Called mom at hospital. She said, "That's nice, sweetie," and had to go. Dad texted, "Good investment paying off." Why doesn't this feel like enough? Age 17. Dr. Chen helped me recognize how this constant emotional scarcity had shaped my adult relationships and career choices. My perfectionism, workaholism, and tendency to overfunction in relationships weren't personality traits, but adaptive survival mechanisms developed in an environment where love was tied to performance. Michael maintained strict boundaries with my parents during this period, screening calls and protecting my space for healing. When they showed up unannounced at our apartment building a week after I left, he met them in the lobby, refusing to let them upstairs. "Sarah will contact you when she's ready," he told them, standing firm despite my father's threats about unauthorized absence from family obligations and my mother's clinical assessment that I was having some sort of breakdown. Their inability to respect this basic boundary further illuminated the dynamic I was working to understand. The most unexpected support came from my workplace. My creative team sent daily encouragement without demanding explanations. My assistant rerouted clients and handled emergencies without complaint. My boss called once to say simply, "Take all the time you need. Your job is secure." These acts of unconditional support from people with no obligation to provide, it highlighted everything missing from my family relationships. In my third therapy session, Dr. Chen suggested I begin writing about my experience, not just for personal processing, but potentially to help others. Emotional neglect is rarely discussed because its victims often can't name what happened to them. Your journals provide a unique documentation of this experience. This suggestion resonated deeply. I began organizing my journals chronologically, typing key entries into a document that quickly grew to over 50 pages. Patterns emerged with painful clarity. My parents consistently prioritized appearance over authenticity, achievement over connection, and social standing over emotional support. The writing became both excavation and reconstruction, allowing me to acknowledge painful truths while building a new narrative based on self-worth rather than external validation. I titled the document, "Invisible Child, Growing Up Emotionally, Unseen in a Materially Privileged Home," and shared it with Dr. Chen and Michael, the first time I'd ever voluntarily exposed my private writings. Their responses affirmed what my parents had never managed to convey, that my experiences mattered, that my feelings were valid, and that my story had inherent worth beyond what it achieved or produced. By the end of the second week, I had developed enough emotional stability to check messages more regularly. What I found was revealing: 37 texts and 16 voicemails from my parents that never once included the words, "I'm sorry," or "We love you." Instead, they focused entirely on my behavior, my overreaction, my unprofessional disappearance, my misunderstanding of a private conversation. The language centered on disruption to their lives rather than concern for my well-being, confirming everything my journaling had revealed about our fundamental dynamic. What I didn't anticipate was how their approach would escalate when these attempts at control failed to produce the desired response. In the third week of my absence, my parents filed a missing person report with the Chicago police, despite knowing exactly where I was. 2 officers conducted a wellness check at my apartment, seeming embarrassed by the obvious misuse of police resources when they found me clearly safe and stable. "Your parents seem pretty concerned," one officer mentioned, while completing paperwork confirming my voluntary absence. "They're concerned about appearances," I corrected, "not about me." The officer's knowing glance suggested this wasn't his first encounter with family dynamics disguised as concern. This forced intervention left me with little choice but to establish direct contact. I agreed to a video call with clear parameters. 20 minutes, with Michael present, focused solely on acknowledging my need for space, rather than debating what I'd heard. My parents appeared on screen looking uncharacteristically disheveled, my mother without makeup, my father's shirt wrinkled. Their composed facades had slipped, revealing not concern, but indignation. "This behavior is completely unacceptable," my mother began without greeting. "Do you have any idea what this has done to our reputation?" The hospital administrator asked if you were having a mental health crisis. My father nodded vigorously. "We've had to make excuses to everyone. The Richardsons' anniversary party is this weekend, and now we have to explain your absence." Neither mentioned my welfare or expressed relief at seeing me safe. Their priorities remained unchanged: social standing, professional reputation, appearances. "I heard everything you said at dinner," I stated calmly, Michael's supportive hand on my shoulder. "About regretting having me, about the disappointing return on your 28-year investment." My mother's face registered shock before quickly rearranging into dismissal. "You completely misinterpreted a private conversation. We were simply discussing career paths hypothetically." My father adopted his client management tone. "Everyone occasionally wonders about roads not taken, Sarah. That doesn't mean we regret our choices." Their synchronized denial, so practiced and smooth, might have worked in the past when I desperately wanted to believe them, but therapy and distance had strengthened my perception. "I've kept journals since I was 7 years old," I told them. "They document a consistent pattern exactly matching what I heard you say. This wasn't a one-time comment. It was the explicit articulation of how you've always treated me." Disbelief crossed their faces, followed by the familiar expression of calculated response formation I'd seen throughout my life. Before they could construct another denial, I shared my screen and showed them scanned pages from 3 decades of diaries, each entry time-stamped and contextual. Age 8, Mom looked at my artwork and asked why the perspective was wrong. I practiced drawing 6 more hours, but she didn't look again. Age 13, Dad missed my debate championship. His assistant brought a card that said, "Good job," in her handwriting. Age 22, first job promotion. Mom asked if there were better companies I could have applied to instead. I scrolled through dozens of entries documenting a lifetime of emotional neglect, watching their faces move from dismissal to defense to uncomfortable recognition. When I finished, my mother attempted redirection. "Every parent makes mistakes, Sarah. This dramatic exit and these ancient grievances are hardly productive." My father nodded. "We gave you every advantage? Most children would be grateful rather than keeping score of perceived slights." Their responses confirmed everything the diaries had documented: invalidation, deflection, blame reversal. "I'm sending you digital copies of selected entries," I told them, ending the call as my father began another justification. "Read them, and if you want to have an honest conversation about our relationship, let me know." 3 days passed without contact. I returned to work, finding unexpected strength in routine and the genuine connections I'd built with colleagues. On the 4th day, an email arrived from my father with the subject line, "We found your diary." The message was brief, uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Sarah, you left one of your childhood diaries in the downstairs bookshelf. We found it while looking for albums to show the Hendersons. I've read it. Your mother doesn't know I'm emailing you. I need to speak with you, not to defend or explain, just to talk, when you're ready." The diary he referenced was one I'd kept at age 10, particularly detailed about my efforts to win their approval and my confusion at their consistent, emotional distance. That he'd read it without my mother's knowledge suggested a crack in their unified front, a potential opening for authentic communication. 2 days later, my mother called. her voice lacking its usual controlled precision. "I found your father, reading your old diary," she said, no greeting or preamble. "He was crying, Sarah. I've never seen him cry, not even when his father died." She paused, and I heard a shaky breath. "Then I read it too. Is that really how you felt? All this time?" For the first time in my memory, my mother's voice held genuine emotion rather than calculated effect. "Yes," I answered simply. "Every day." The silence that followed was filled with 28 years of unspoken truth. When she spoke again, her voice was almost unrecognizable. "I don't know how to fix this." Another first. My mother acknowledging something beyond her immediate ability to control. "I don't know if it can be fixed," I responded honestly. "But understanding what happened would be a start." The conversation that followed was halting, uncomfortable, but marked by something unprecedented. My mother listening without interrupting, acknowledging emotions without dismissing them as inefficient or irrational. She didn't defend or justify, just absorbed what I was saying with growing comprehension of the damage that had been done. When we hung up an hour later, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. The perfectly maintained wall between us had developed its first significant crack, allowing a thin ray of authentic connection to penetrate decades of emotional distance. Dr. Chen suggested family therapy as the next step if my parents were genuinely interested in repairing our relationship. To my surprise, they agreed, though not without resistance. Our first session via video conference was awkward and tense, with my father initially treating it like a business negotiation and my mother approaching it as a medical consultation. The therapist gently redirected them, establishing that this wasn't about assigning blame, but understanding patterns to create healthier dynamics. By the third session, we'd identified a generational pattern of emotional neglect. My father reluctantly shared stories of his own childhood with emotionally distant parents who prioritized achievement and social standing above affection. "My father never once told me he was proud of me," he admitted, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. The closest he came was nodding when I announced my acceptance to Harvard Business School. My mother revealed similar experiences with her surgeon father and socially ambitious mother. "Emotions were considered weaknesses in our house," she explained. "My mother's highest praise was adequate performance after piano recitals." For the first time, I saw my parents not as the powerful architects of my emotional deprivation, but as earlier victims of the same damaging patterns they had unconsciously perpetuated. This understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but provided crucial context for how intergenerational trauma operates, even in materially privileged environments. Dr. Chen helped us establish a framework for careful, limited contact while I continued my individual healing journey. I maintained physical distance, declining invitations to visit Boston while engaging in structured weekly video conversations focused on specific topics rather than general pleasantries. The most significant change was my freedom from seeking their approval. I no longer filtered my experiences to highlight achievements or minimize emotions. I spoke honestly about my feelings, my relationship with Michael, my creative writing process, and my growing understanding of emotional health. Sometimes my honesty was met with uncomfortable silence or awkward attempts at connection from parents with limited emotional vocabulary, but these authentic interactions, however imperfect, held more value than decades of performance-based communication. During this period of limited contact, I began writing more extensively about emotional neglect, publishing anonymous articles in psychology magazines and online mental health forums. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people recognizing their own experiences in my words, many for the first time. With Dr. Chen's encouragement, I started a support group for adult children of emotionally unavailable parents, creating a safe space where participants could name and process experiences often dismissed as not that bad compared to more overt forms of abuse. This work became increasingly meaningful, providing purpose to my painful experiences and helping others recognize patterns they had normalized throughout their lives. One article caught the attention of a national parenting magazine, leading to a feature story on emotional neglect in achievement-oriented families. Though published under a pseudonym, the article gained significant attention, including, ironically, from my mother, who mentioned reading a fascinating piece on emotional neglect without realizing its author was her daughter. 6 months after leaving Boston, I agreed to meet my parents in person at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant halfway between Chicago and Boston. The encounter was awkward, but marked by tentative authenticity from all sides. My father, always perfectly tailored and composed, arrived with his tie slightly askew and mentioned having trouble sleeping before the meeting. My mother, normally critical of my appearance, simply hugged me and said, "It's good to see you," without commentary on my hair, clothes, or weight. We talked for 4 hours, navigating uncomfortable silences and occasional defensive reactions, but maintaining connection through difficult emotions. When my father said, "We never meant to hurt you," I responded with newly established boundaries. Impact matters more than intention. I needed you to see me, not just my achievements. Rather than dismissing this perspective, he nodded slowly and replied, "I'm trying to understand that now." My mother added softly, "We don't know how to do this differently yet, but we want to learn." That yet contained more acknowledgement of needed change than I'd heard in 28 years. As I completed the manuscript of my memoir, now titled The Perfect Daughter: Reclaiming Self-Worth After Emotional Neglect, I recognized that my journey wasn't about achieving a perfect resolution with my parents, but about finding peace within myself. Our relationship remains a work in progress, 3 people learning a new emotional language after decades of miscommunication. There are still difficult moments, relapses into old patterns, and days when the damage seems too extensive to repair. But there are also new experiences. My father asking about my feelings rather than my accomplishments. My mother acknowledging when she slips into criticism rather than connection. Both of them learning, imperfectly but genuinely, to relate to me as a person rather than a reflection of themselves. The most profound lesson I've learned is that forgiveness isn't a single moment, but an ongoing process, requiring conscious choice and consistent effort from all involved. It doesn't erase the past, but creates space for a different future. Healing from emotional neglect doesn't happen in dramatic revelations, but in small, consistent moments of being truly seen and valued. My worth was never dependent on their ability to recognize it, though I spent decades believing it was. This journey has taught me that family healing takes time, effort, and willingness from all sides. Sometimes those elements align, allowing for genuine transformation. Other times, boundaries must be maintained to protect hard-won emotional health. The diary they discovered became a bridge between worlds that had seemed hopelessly disconnected. The inner reality of a child desperate for unconditional love, and the limited emotional capacity of parents who had never received it themselves. Have you ever discovered that something you wrote in the past helped heal a relationship in the present? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone in their experience of emotional neglect. Remember that your feelings are valid, your experiences matter, and healing is always possible, even when the path forward isn't clear. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage on your own journey toward authentic connection.